and welcoming to the studio the good Dr. Hancock is joining us, and of course, from all the way over there in the Carolinas, founder and CEO Debbie Ray Rivers joins us too. Debs, how's everything going over there?
Everything is wonderful. Thank you, Shelley.
Good.
Hi, Dr. Hancock.
Hi, Debbie.
Hey. Hi, Bermuda. Thank you for tuning in with us. If this is the first time that you have heard a Scar Survivor Hour radio show, well, we just want you to know that this is another platform for SCARs to spread awareness and to be an advocate and a voice for children who've been sexually molested, as well as their affected families. Our show is an opportunity to help our listeners understand child sexual abuse and the traumatic effects that it can have on children and their affected families. And it can follow us into our adulthood. So it's important that we provide this information to our community. I'd like to extend our sincere gratitude, as we do every month, to the Conduit Foundation. They help make this show possible. Their support and their financial gift allows us to continue to bring important information on child sexual abuse to our listening community. So we are so grateful to them. I just want to let everyone know that this show does include sensitive content. It's meant to help our adult-only listeners understand the emotional and the physical and the psychological scars that survivors experience as a result of childhood trauma. And we also want our survivors, our adult survivors out there, to know that they're not alone. Now, we always do this in our show, so before we begin, we just want to offer a gentle reminder to anyone listening is a survivor of child sexual abuse. Please know that your well-being comes first, and taking care of you is what matters. That matters most. And as we discuss a topic like this, it can bring up difficult emotions or memories. We ask that you please practice self-care. If at any point you are feeling overwhelmed or triggered or emotionally upset, please take care of yourself. Give yourself permission to change this channel, to walk away. And I don't know where you're listening, if you're listening from home or in your car or at work or you're in a store. You have the power to pause, right? Turn off this program, change the channel, and then return when you feel ready. Because healing is really about honoring your needs. You come first. Recognize your limits. And as we said last month, it's not a sign of weakness when you do that. It's actually an act of strength because you're taking care of yourself. Dr. Hancock and I today, we're going to talk about the 3 S's surrounding child sexual abuse. Silence, shame, and stigma. And each of these has a purpose. And each of these 3 S words can be conquered. We really believe that sexual abuse has been going on for generations in our Bermuda community and around the world. And what we have learned over the years is that it involves people that we know, love, or trust. A majority of people who harm children sexually are people we know, love, or trust. And we know that from survey results. And because of that, it can contribute to silence, shame, and stigma. And silence has a way of protecting pain. But survivors, conversations on this topic have the power to create change. That's what we want to do, because for way too long, shame and stigma have kept survivors of child sexual abuse silent. So we're going to go through these 3 S's, and we're going to talk about the role that we each play in revealing secrets, undoing the shame, and reducing the stigma. And before Dr. Hancock and I start this conversation, as we do every month, we just want to remind everyone about our broadcasting rules. So those who listen, I don't know who you are, but if you listen every month, be patient with us as we go through these. The number here at Power 95 is 292-9595, and you are welcome to call in. As I said earlier, this is a sensitive topic, so when calling into this show, please, we ask our callers, please don't mention your name or perpetrator's name. If you have a childhood story of sexual abuse, your story is vitally important. Lived experiences is how we learn how to prevent it. And so you can share, but please no names mentioned. We have no way of vetting that. But reach out to me if you ever want to share your story at Debbie, DEBI, at scars.bm, or you can call the office. And Brenda Lee's over there, and you can call 297-2277, and she'll reach out to me. Please also be mindful that this show is not meant for personal attack. It's meant to educate and empower and advocate for the precious children in our country and also for us adult survivors. We're not legal experts, so we can't answer any questions about, any legal questions, but we can certainly answer questions about surviving sexual abuse, because I'm a survivor, and also how trauma affects victims, because Dr. Hancock is the professional in the room, the registered clinical psychologist with years of experience in this. We're also going to ask no attack on any lawyer, judge, or magistrate. So thank you, everyone, for understanding our broadcast rules and respecting them. And Dr. Hancock, let's get started.
All right.
So let's start with silence. We're going to talk about the 7 reasons why silence around child sexual abuse can be dangerous. And we want to start with the first one, which I wrote. Silence protects child molesters and their affected family members, right? And it allows abuse to remain hidden, and it prevents accountability. I want to say, trying to protect the family name keeps people from speaking up, and it allows child molesters to continue to have access to children. Predators will continue to have access to children with this opportunity to scar another child, because we know sexual abuse leaves scars, right? Emotional, sometimes physical, psychological scars. I can tell you from personal experience that my children's predator was 78 years old. And I'm going to also tell you, as a mother, he was a 78-year-old person who was known, a close family, trusted family member. And the voice in my head did say, he's too old to go to prison, right? It did say that. Yeah. The voice in my head said, well, he said, sorry, I must forgive him. It did say that. But guess what? I had to move the shame and the accountability from my children to its rightful place, from the protection of the predator to its rightful place. It was his actions. Not, I make no apologies, and I shouldn't have to apologize or feel bad. Keeping the secret would have sent a message to my daughters that appearance and personal relationships matter more than protection. It would have. And that's not a good message for children who are victims of sexual crimes. It is important that children see the adults in their life make choices that show accountability. My girls have to see that. And, there are things that come up, feelings that come up for family members of victims. I mean, he was 78 years old. If he died at Westgate, that would not have been our fault. Mm-hmm. And that's what you worry about. He's 78 years old, he's going to prison. Well, we didn't put him in prison. He put himself there by changing my little girls' lives forever. Breaking silence is not about destroying families. It's about stopping harm. It's about supporting child victims of a crime, to help them with their healing, to protect the next child, right, mm-hmm. Dr. Hancock? And so with your years of experience, help us understand what happens to a child when adults don't believe them, or when adults stand up for predators, or don't make the right decision when it comes to accountability.
Well, when a child's not believed, we kind of describe that as like the second injury. So the first injury is the trauma, is the abuse, and the second injury is not being believed. And research consistently shows that it can be even more psychologically damaging than the abuse itself. And, and here's why. The original abuse that was perpetrated by somebody who may have already existed outside of the child's circle of a trusted attachment. And that may have been the case, or it may have been a trusted family member. But the disbelief and abandonment at the point of the child's disclosure of abuse is also delivered by the very people the child's brain is wired to depend on for basic needs for survival. And, the brain doesn't distinguish between emotional abandonment and physical threat. So to a child's nervous system, being disbelieved by a parent, teacher, or a trusted adult registers as, danger, feeling alone. There's no rescue coming. And that takes part in the part of the brain called the amygdala. So that's the brain smoke detector. It's the danger detector. And it fires a full threat response. So the cortisol and adrenaline, it floods the body. And unlike the original traumatic event, which eventually ended, this betrayal from their parent or the point of a point of disclosure, it has no endpoint. So the child continues living with the very people that failed them. And that threat signal, it never turns off. So when you hear many victims as they grow up, they struggle to settle, never feeling emotionally settled. They're dysregulated emotionally, always anticipating danger and threat. So,
yeah, yeah, and that can carry on into other relationships and their adulthood, right?
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to break this. We can't be silent about it. We have to, because it does protect the predator and the family members of the predator and other people in that predator's life when we don't do what's right.
Yeah.
And that sends a very bad message to children.
Yeah.
Like, this person's important, more important than me, right?
Yeah. And, and it causes, it causes a minimization of the child's experience. So what they felt was horrible and scary. They now have to register in their brain that, well, maybe it wasn't. They have to start maybe even questioning themselves, doubting themselves and doubting the experience, which then just, you think about the layers of trauma and the layers of emotional impact, and we're just piling layer upon layer. And so the healing then is going to take a lot longer because you have to peel away behind all those layers. Right.
The second reason I wrote down was, why silence can be dangerous. It also can allow it to continue, right? We know that those that use children for sexual pleasure, gratification, or power, whatever reason they're doing this, they don't usually stop with one child, right? That's a sickness, and it has to be stopped. And by ignoring it, staying silent, it just allows it to continue. And we know that the spillover is too great if we don't. But help us with the brain that says using children for sexual pleasure and power is permissible. Like, that's obviously what they think. These are people that made other important decisions in their life, predators, that required common sense and knowing between right and wrong. But why does this area say, no, this is okay? Vulnerable little child, this is okay.
Well, and one of the questions often is, what kind of person can do this? And, the answer, it's pretty complex. So most people have have strong psychological breaks that make the thought of sexually harming a child unimaginable. Children naturally trigger feelings of protection, nurturing, and caring for them. So for someone to violate a child, those protective breaks have to be overridden. And so, perpetrators typically don't just lose control. Instead, they often develop distorted ways of thinking that allow them to justify or minimize what they're doing. So I think, we've also heard the child wanted it. He or she enjoyed it. I'm teaching the child about sex. This isn't really harming them. It's my way of showing love. And these are not truth. These are what we call cognitive distortions that allow offenders to live with behavior that would otherwise create overwhelming guilt. As many of us know the emotion of guilt, many of us, do everything in our power to resolve guilt. And sometimes people will deny, and it turns into anger or it turns into blame in order to avoid the guilt. Or, healthy people will want to resolve it and do right by the person they have harmed to help them feel better. But,
right.
Another...
And if that's not addressed, they'll continue.
Oh yeah, I mean it's it becomes an addiction once you believe a lie, once you believe your own distorted view of what you're doing, it becomes easier and easier to do.
Right.
And
right.
But another part too is perpetrators often feature something called objectification. So healthy adults recognize children as vulnerable people with their own rights, own emotions, and developmental needs. But perpetrators often stop seeing the child as a person and instead see the child as a means to meet their own emotional or sexual needs.
Wow. Wow. And that's why the most effective treatment is so important. If you don't get to the root of that, right?
Yeah. And then the other part is the power and control that is obviously there, the need to feel powerful and in control. And obviously children are smaller, they're easier to manipulate, they're more trusting, and depend on us as adults. So the likelihood they're going to believe us versus their own peer is a lot higher. So that imbalance of power becomes the part of abuse. And so through grooming, secrecy, threats, or emotional manipulation, the perpetrator establishes dominance and teaches the child that the adult is in control.
Wow. And for a young mind, a little young mind, we're talking about 8 or 9 or 10, maybe even 4 or 5, they don't understand that.
No, they cannot consent to sexual activity. They lack the neurological, cognitive, emotional, and typically the legal capacity to understand or agree to an adult sexual advances. It will always rest with the adult. It doesn't matter if the child, appears to not be fighting away. They're scared.
Of course. And it's an adult's responsibility to protect kids.
Always.
But the problem is they're not thinking like an adult.
Well, and the perpetrator...
go ahead, sorry.
The perpetrator does not see that the child, that they're not protecting the child. They don't see it that way, right? So what we would say is, well, they're not protecting the child. They are harming the child. Well, they don't. They've mastered the ability to manipulate data and information to fit their narrative that, this, I am protecting them, or this is not a piece of evidence to support that I'm not protecting them. So they don't see it that way.
Wow. So the third reason that we wrote was silence promotes secrecy, right? It creates a place where painful experiences or uncomfortable truths remain hidden. When we put it under a rug and hope it goes away, we're hoping that everything's going to be okay. The difficulty with that is it can rear its ugly head many years later. So talk to us about how trauma can resurface even years later. So when you're young, you feel like it's okay that we're not going to say anything, we're not going to do anything. Like they were wrong in doing it, and I won't let you around them. I'll let you around them, but I'll be there with you. Or like, what happens later on in life when kids grow up and that resentment and that anger comes out years later, and affects the family? How dare you? You should have done something, right?
Yeah, well, and especially with silence, the difficulty and danger becomes that as you develop into adulthood, and that same narrative has been a part of your life all the way through your development. When it does resurface, it may resurface differently, or it may resurface the same, where you're actually starting to wonder, well, did it happen? So it's very hard to kind of break down the barrier of how they conceptualized what happened to them, and find the truth within that, without going back to minimizing when they were forced to, find a way to survive and cope, to minimize what happened to them just so that they could survive and function.
Yes, and Dr. Hancock, that could also happen with other things in life that go bad.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, so let me put it under a rug, and let me not deal with this. This has been very upsetting to me, but I can't really deal with it, right? It might encourage other things in life that are difficult not to deal with it and talk about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you develop a pattern of dealing with situations that are uncomfortable, because especially since you were not believed, you were not protected, and it wasn't dealt with, then you just, many times the survivors assume that, well, nobody is going to protect me. So why am I going to be vulnerable enough to disclose this if I'm not going to get support? And that's the belief. It's not necessarily true, but that's what they believe based on, what they've been conditioned to believe, because in that very first instance of trauma, they were pushed away, essentially. and told they, that,
Yeah.
that what happened to them wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, and then they can't trust adults.
Nope.
They probably some of them go through life not trusting adults because these didn't do the right thing.
Yeah.
So what adult can I trust,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
then they act out.
And missing out on experiences. There's so much that's lost. It's a lifetime of change. That could have otherwise been so different. And that's, I think, one of the hardest things to digest is the fact that these children's lives are changed forever. And with treatment, we can minimize the impact, but without it, it's very devastating to even think and believe how this person's life could have been so very different.
Yes, and that brings us right into, it's a great segue for the fourth reason that silence is dangerous, is silence can delay healing and prolong suffering, right?
Yep. Well, yeah, it especially if it's not addressed in that moment, it definitely becomes harder because, again, this person has, quote, functioned well enough sometimes, right? They haven't gone down a pathway of self-destruction. They've, maybe barely functioned in life. But it, so in their mind, they may not necessarily feel like they need to address it because, well, I'm okay. And so they don't, because they haven't seen life outside of how better it could be, it's a lot safer to just stay where they're at. Because it might feel like there's potentially a lot more consequences from actually dealing with it than living the way that they're living right now. Because again, they don't know any different. They don't know that life could be better.
Right.
So, and the idea of trust, right? So it can delay because of trust, but it also can take a lot longer because we have to, kind of dig through the layers of hurt, trauma, sadness, all of that, grief.
Yes. I wrote as the fifth one, silence hides the truth. I mean, truth for kids creates safety, it creates trust, it creates protection. But when children learn that trust matters, they learn their voice has value and that they can speak up when something feels wrong, confusing, or unsafe. This is what we want for children. It helps them understand between right and wrong. But if children are encouraged not to speak the truth, they may go through their adulthood having trouble telling the truth, in fear of getting in trouble, in fear of not, being blamed for something. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Is there a correlation between victims of abuse and, perhaps with no judgment, but perhaps a pathological liar, somebody who's lying all the time because they never could tell the truth when they were young? Is there a correlation between that?
It's a little bit more complicated than that, right? So, there's no evidence that necessarily causes child sex abuse causes a person to become a pathological liar, but there is a relationship between childhood abuse, secrecy, shame, patterns of lying or deception that serves as survival strategies. So they can look like chronic lying, but they're often fundamentally different from what we describe as pathological lying. Because with pathological lying, there's an intent and purpose. So, children who are sexually abused, who are often shut down, they're taught that telling the truth is dangerous.
Right.
So their silence, it's not a character flaw, it's a survival skill. So they lie because, someone they know and trust, they've been instructed to don't tell anybody, this is our secret, no one will believe you, you'll get into trouble. So over time, the child learns that by telling the truth, it has consequences because they were threatened. Because the person that was the abuser, or even unfortunately the parent that might try to silence them, they've interpreted that message as, well, I'm going to get into trouble, or I'm going to get that other person into trouble, and that might be the message that's sent with the parent silencing them. And that's not what the parent's intending, but that, whatever message is being sent to the child and how they perceive it and their experience is what matters. Lying and remaining silent keeps them safer. That's what they learn. So the brain adapts to survive through that. So, they learn to lie, because it makes them feel safe. It protects people.
Yeah, yeah, to not tell the truth.
To not tell the
instead of
truth.
saying, it's like to not tell the truth, not to speak their truth. So thank you for helping us understand that. The sixth reason for silence, why silence around child sexual abuse can be dangerous, is because it can avoid justice. I mean, silence can stand in the way of justice for children. Their accountability is denied to them, and the healing can be delayed as a result of that. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when it comes to the justice system and actually going to court, it can really send a message that their story may not matter, and also too, you're also having to go back and try and figure out what actually happened, because if a child is silenced, the narrative of what happened can change. And so when they go to disclose it, they're battling the difference between, well, this person's telling me to tell the truth and say what happened, but my parents or, my guardian, whoever it is, told me that I have to be silent. My perpetrator told me to be silent or I'm going to get hurt. And so that's very confusing for a child.
Yes.
So.
Yes. That's why I think children should only tell it once to the
Absolutely.
professional.
Well,
and
yeah.
it should be videoed.
And we've
then
talked.
and then that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was saying we've talked many times
Yeah.
about the fact that I know that it's very difficult when a child discloses, and it's just automatic to want to get to the bottom of it, to want to get information, to want to figure it out, and but you're actually potentially going to cause a problem in what might have to be a testimony where the story might change. And let me tell you, as we know, unfortunately, defense lawyers they're there to protect the defendant, whoever it is. And so any glitch, any loophole in a story is going to potentially damage the case. And so it's very important to let professionals who will document everything do the investigation. It's really hard to avoid and really hard to not want to know, but we've got to be careful.
Yeah. And then the seventh reason that why silence around child sexual abuse can be dangerous is because silence contributes to stigma and shame. When difficult issues like this are not openly discussed, children who have been sexually violated, they can feel isolated and afraid to speak. And so it basically feeds the stigma, which amplifies the shame and allows the secrecy to thrive. So, without truth, there's no deterrent for those who sexually violate children either. There's no deterrent.
No.
And it drives that shame deeper.
It definitely does. It definitely does.
Yeah. So, yeah. And so, we really want to, this is one thing we have not done in all the years we've been doing this work is reduce the stigma. There's still a stigma around this. And when it comes to survivors of child sexual abuse, we got to take shame captive for us as survivors. We cannot give shame the power because I always say, and I wrote some stuff down that I would love you to talk about again, the connection between the brain and mind and our thoughts, because shame, the minute you hear it and you remember it, you tell yourself, because you feel there's something about sexual abuse that just causes shame and silence. But the minute you hear it, and this is why I said over and over to my daughters, like, you did not cause this. You were betrayed. You were deceived. I didn't want them to live with that shame because, and you can't give it time, because the minute you think it has to be dismissed, right? Not to allow it to steal your peace, not to give it space. And I would have to keep telling my daughters, you're valuable, you're beautiful. This should not have happened because our thoughts, and especially what perpetrators tell children, that it's their fault, they're enjoying it, and all the other stuff, it can play an important part of a victim shame. Isn't that right?
Yeah. So whatever we think, if we hear something over and over again, even if it's our internal dialogue, at some point, what we do is we look for evidence to support it because we're starting to believe it. It just goes through like just the manipulation of information. If something, like is sent to you over and over again, it's going to start to marinate in your mind, and you're going to start thinking about it more, which means you're going to start looking for evidence to support it. So if a child has a narrative of it's my fault, I'm to blame, then, they're actually going to find, even if it's not true, they're going to find evidence to support that thought, not because they want to, but because their brain is starting to wire that way. And the neural pathways in regards to things like shame, they become hardwired. So every time a child's disclosure of what happened to them was met with disbelief, minimizing, denial, punishment. So the brain reinforced a specific neural circuit. So speaking equals danger, truth equals rejection. Therefore, I am unworthy of protection. So, as the neurons fire together and wire together, these pathways become the brain's default operating system. And it's not that the child consciously, chooses to believe that they're worthless. The brain has been structurally conditioned to default there because of the constant, repeated narrative.
Right. And that's why we have to capture those thoughts quickly when they come, and like you said, and go, having professional help that help you retrain your brain. I always look at it as like, and I wrote it down, like imagine you have a camera and you zoom it in on your mind, and in your mind that holds your thoughts, and you ask yourself, what's taking up a lot of space in my thoughts? And you zoom it in, and then if it's, something like the lie of shame, like, you zoom it out. When you zoom it in, you see that little girl or little boy, right, who was deceived, who was rejected, who was perhaps even abandoned, right, by the adults in their life that, they expected to stand up for them and protect them. And so, you start thinking about the adults in your life who really should have kept you safe, who should have believed in you, who should have removed the danger in your life. Because sometimes even adults in the life, when a child reveals, the adults in that child's life allow the perpetrator to continue to be in the child's life. Yeah. And so, right?
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that happens, any little thing that a parent does, we always have to be careful too that a child is receiving a message, and they may not always state what the message is to allow the parent to clarify whether that's what they intended or not. So, but if you think from a behavioral perspective, if an adult denies that the abuse happened or minimizes it, then the child's brain concludes, my perception of reality can't be trusted. People won't believe me. If the child is blamed, the child will, obviously the message is sent that, I caused this or I'm bad. If the child is told to stay quiet and be secretive, and this is very disturbing, but, a child's brain might conclude something like, my pain is a burden or is an embarrassment. I'm alone. The truth is dangerous. Silence keeps me safe. So, right. And many times children will not share their message because at the point where this behavior has happened toward them, they no longer feel safe. So they're not going to feel safe enough to share what their perspective or the message they received. They are going to shut down. Yes.
And imagine of 20 years of carrying that. Yep. Now they're in their 20s or in their 30s. Some people didn't even tell to their 40s. I didn't tell to my 30s of my own abuse. But, think about listening to all of that and that voice in your head, like that becomes you when it's all those thoughts are not true.
Yeah.
Right?
And they interpret so you think as we get older, we experience more and more situations and more independently. And what's been conditioned to believe and think is now being transferred over across many situations automatically. And it may be inaccurate, but again, it may cause them to miss out on the experiences or sabotage relationships, misread people, and without any context or any help to help them decipher that, we need to challenge this.
Right.
But they have to
That's
get
where
past the
professional
idea
help
of,
comes in.
and being able to trust somebody. They have to get past the idea that it takes one person to give them an experience that opens the door for them to accept and receive support and help.
Right. And how do you work like on the shame part of it? Like, helping an adult survivor, really challenge the shame that they're feeling that was not their shame. Shame is a feeling that something about us is wrong with us or unworthy or not enough. And knowing that perpetrators of child sexual abuse, they love to shift the blame, many of them, so that they're not feeling that guilt and that they're doing anything wrong, right? So they're shifting that blame on little young minds, as you said, as to justify their actions. They're experts at that. And so that type of communication to a little person can stay with that child. And shame is one of them. Shame says, I did something wrong, and there's something wrong with me. And it's not.
Yeah. Well, I think, part of it is also working backwards as well, so to start off with the current situations that are easier to challenge when they automatically assume that they're doing something wrong or have done something wrong with the misreading of certain behaviors of other people. And then you can tie those things into their history of trauma to see where it came from so that they understand why their automatic response is, this is my fault, I deserve it, or I'm an embarrassment, so that they don't have to carry that as well. And also, it's many times there's so much emotional dysregulation with survivors that working with them on the intensity of what they experience as emotions and applying it to situations that may not rate the same, say on a scale of 1 to 10. So a person might feel the intensity of an 8, but the situation in reality, when it comes to danger, long-term consequences, is like a 3. And so, working towards trying to fill that gap to make the emotion match, get closer to the situation, is key.
I bet.
So.
And then helping them see themselves as someone who they really are, right? Like changing their perception of themselves.
Yeah, we have
from
to
victim to
rebuild,
survivor to thriver.
Yep, we got to rebuild their whole identity. Part of that being a large part of a person's identity is more self-protective. Nobody wants to identify themselves as a victim, or have that kind of overriding everything that they do in their head and deciding, making decisions for themselves as it relates to what the abuse has done to them. But so, we have to rework their whole conceptualization of who they are and who they are outside of it. It's an experience, and eventually having it such an experience that they had that's external rather than it being an internal part of them. And that's the that's the long-term
even though their
goal.
pain is, even though their pain is in their heart, and
yes, yeah,
it's getting that pain out and helping them understand that, this, you were a child, and and you did not cause this, and it's okay to talk about it, right? Because there's so much silence around this topic, and silence and shame together. But we can't change things when this is why help is so critical, and intervention. And not only that, Dr. Hancock, it's also support from the adults in our life, right? Like if there's an adult listening today who perhaps, because let's face it, years ago there was no scars and there was no talking about child sexual abuse. It was so taboo, as we know. We just didn't even understand it. I mean, some of the decisions that adults made years ago I have to believe in my heart it was a lack of education or understanding what this can do, because we weren't talking about prevention. But for the adults out there that perhaps did not receive the education and the support to do the right thing, or perhaps they even suffered with their own childhood trauma and lack of self-worth, and protected other adults for their own self-preservation, what would you say to them that might heal the relationship with their own children or children in their life that they were responsible for and didn't do the right thing years ago?
Yeah, and that can be quite difficult, because the idea of listening to something that might resonate with you because of your own experience, that's a cue in itself. Because if you're having a strong emotional reaction, and your first emotional reaction is to hold this, to hold the secret close, or to minimize it, then that's a red flag that you might be able to use some support as well. And just because you don't think that your child or this person needs support, and your own conceptualization of what happened, if they're asking for it, or they are behaving as though they do need support, if you love them, why wouldn't you do and go out of your way? Why, we should not be the judge of what other people need. We should let other people decide what they need. But it's so, like I said, it's so important to just to believe people. But again, a lot of it requires a lot, self-reflection. We have to look at ourselves when we have a reaction to something and figure out, well, why am I having a strong reaction to this? Even if it's not our situation or our issue. If you're,
Yes. Where is it coming from? Where's it coming from? Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Because there could be shame with those who contributed to the silence, whether that was intentional or unintentional, right? Where the silence was encouraged. And bring it into the light, right? Get some help, get some support, get some intervention, to put our families back together. I mean, that's what's key, because, but to continue to ignore and deny, that's not going to help any relationship.
Well, and I think, and probably maybe a big suggestion as well, is that if you don't feel like you have the capacity to support somebody that you supposedly love and care about, then know within yourself to take a step back. If you don't want to contribute or try to convince the person of your conceptualization of what happened to them, but you can even just you can avoid it initially but you can also support them. So you can say something like, "Oh my gosh, like that's very heavy, and I'm very sorry that that this has happened to you. Let's look at somebody who can support you, because I'm not sure that I have it in me to support you the way you need to be supported."
Right, but I love you, and and to also take some accountability for that if they played a part in that. Just to say, what can I do with removing the guilt and just saying, I want this relationship to be better, and how can we make it better? And that might even require that person doing their own healing, that adult, because maybe that adult has unaddressed trauma from their own life.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it, holding ourselves accountable is, as we know, it's a kind of a hot topic on the island, right? But being accountable does not mean you're a terrible person. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to make mistakes and gain understanding of yourself and have self-compassion as to why you did the things that you did. It doesn't take away from the need to make the other person heal and feel better by your actions. But, it doesn't have to destroy a relationship. But if you continue to, beat this person down with denial and disregard or harsh words, then you're destroying a relationship.
Yeah. And that
you,
person has every right to put up boundaries.
oh, absolutely. That
take care of
person
themselves.
has the control of the relationship at that point, and they don't have to reconnect with you if you're an unsafe person. If you continue to be an unsafe person to talk to,
Yeah. Yeah.
which would be
Or a
unfortunate.
person that, yeah. It is unfortunate because that breaks up families. It breaks up relationships.
Yeah.
But ownership is so important without bringing on your own. Get rid of the guilt. Just, you know what? I didn't have the tools. I did not make a good decision. And how to move forward if you want to move forward, right? It's like giving them that space and that decision to make certain choices because when they were young, they didn't have those choices, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We got to give them the power back.
Yeah.
And make the, let the survivor feel like they have some control over it again.
Yeah, yeah, and and I think sometimes the fear of rejection can play a role in whether or not a contributing person will accept responsibility. So the fear of, well, if I say I'm sorry, or if I hold myself accountable to this person, I'm afraid that they're going to lash out at me. They're going to reject me, and so I have to hold on to the control that I have, which is to continue in this denial or disregard mindset. But again, that's all focused on that person and not the person that was actually harmed.
Right.
So.
Right. Or abandoned or rejected or nobody stood up for them.
So so one of the things I would say to those people, the family members and everybody else who contributed, is that, ask yourself, do I love this person? And that might seem like a silly question of course I do. Okay, but if you do, what do you want for this child? What do you want for this person in your life? How can you demonstrate that you care about them? And, is the denial, continuing to deny or continue to try to convince them that it wasn't a big deal, is that really going to help? Because at the point where they're coming to you and or talking to you about it, they already know what you did wrong. So denying it is actually not going to convince them that they're wrong. At the moment.
And not looking at yourself. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're good.
I was going to say, not looking at yourself as being a naughty person, because that goes back to your childhood. It's just saying, I didn't make the choices that I should have made years ago, and the decision, because of my own childhood trauma, I had no support in my life. Just claim it, right? Claim it.
Own your mistakes. Own, and that comes with self-compassion, right? So the ability to have compassion for yourself of, the reasons why you made decisions, the decisions you did in that moment, is key to actually creating change. You can't do that unless you acknowledge what you did, but also then understand that, you didn't intentionally try to harm anybody, but you still have to own it to that person because they need the support and they need you to feel remorse. Right? They need you to feel remorse for what you did because they're not going to get that from the perpetrator. So the least you can do as their support system is provide that for them.
Yes. And that will release your own shame as someone who didn't make the right choices.
Absolutely.
Then you're not going to live with that shame anymore, that, feeling the guilt, or you're releasing it because you're putting it out into the light and you're talking about it and you're remorse, you feel this remorse, you want this relationship, you want this child that you were responsible for, to build that relationship up again. I think that's so important.
And the thing that the person will have to accept, right, is, or not, but if you want a relationship, is to allow the survivor to to go at their speed. You're at their mercy, unfortunately. I mean, unfortunately, you put yourself there, but you're at their mercy, right? At that point, you have they're in control of how much they want you in their life. And, chances are they're going to want you in their life as a person that they thought that, you were supposed to be back at that time. But, you've got to be patient, because this is not a magic wand. And just like with anything, just because a person apologizes, it doesn't mean that everything's fine. The other person recognize the other person has to go through a series of different stages of developing trust again. You don't develop trust, with a magic wand or a light switch. It is developed over time. And, because of that, it's probably going to take time to redevelop the relationship. It can't go at your speed just because you want it. So.
Yes, you want to give them their space. They deserve that. And let them know, I'm here when you're ready.
Yeah, exactly.
I love you and I'm here when you're ready.
Yeah.
So important. All right, let's quickly talk about the social stigma, and how reducing stigma around child sexual abuse can help in preventing and reducing the long-term impact on trauma. I mean, it's changing cultural norms, right? By turning it upside down, by giving the survivors the gift of freedom. when we reduce social stigma, this gift of freedom from guilt and unfounded guilt, unfounded shame, the silence, be able to talk about it freely. We know that's what happens. It increases empathy, right? Now, with the people in the survivor's life. Like, now I understand this person, the choices, the outbursts, the fears, the insecurities. Now, the choices that now, and for a survivor to understand themselves. When we decrease this stigma, it also sends a message that children are a priority.
Yeah.
And silence is not an option. No. When we turn this on its head, we say silence is not an option. That's a huge message. And also that it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? It's okay. We're not judged by, it doesn't identify us as a person. Everybody knows I'm a survivor and my girls, but I said to my girls, that doesn't identify you. No. Our training has, the 3-hour training that we provide from the Darkness to Light organization is people talking about their lived experiences. And under their name, it describes who they are, passionate, an advocate. It's not saying I'm a survivor, I was sexually abused. It's who you are, which is so much more than the trauma that you endure. You're so much more than that.
Yeah, and even describing a survivor of something as horrible as sexual abuse comes with a lot of different characteristics. The resilience, the strength, the persistence, the drive, all of that. Like, those are all incredible qualities.
Yes.
So
yes.
So it doesn't have to be, because again, a person can hear the word survivor and interpret it in many different ways, but you want to interpret it as such of more of these characteristics, not of stuck in shame and feeling sorry for yourself, etc.
Yeah.
And part of
you're so much more than that.
You are definitely much more than that. You're like kind of seeing it as an experience, not something that is you, because you didn't cause it, and it wasn't there when you were born. Our personality develops over the course of time, and particularly in childhood, it starts to it starts to develop, and then it slows down as you become a teenager and adult based on experiences. But that wasn't the sexual abuse, and the impact wasn't there when you were born, in terms of what your pathway of personality development was.
Exactly.
So
exactly. It might have impeded it for a few years, but this is why it's so important that when children tell, they're believed, they're loved, they're supported, they see accountability. Nobody gives up on them, so that they won't go through that trajectory of perhaps having to hide it or numb it out. Because all of that will delay healing as well. And so the faster we can respond appropriately. I love you. This should not have happened to you. It was not your fault. You did nothing wrong. I'm going to be here. We're going to support this. sexually abusing children is against the law, and even though this is a close relative, they have to be held responsible for that. We're not responsible for sending them to jail. They are. We're not responsible for them for whatever the consequence comes out of this case. They are. It's really reinforcing that with a child, and we can heal, and then getting them the help that they need to drive in their life, and also not letting them give up on the capacity to hope, right? To let them know that, don't give up.
Yeah, I mean, reducing the stigma really also, it starts with, seeing sexual abuse as a real thing, as a severe point of trauma. And, and I think obviously, you at SCARS, and you've done an incredible, I mean, just
our team, yes, all of us. You're on the board, all of us.
At reducing the idea that this is a real thing. This is very, very important. And then comes actually the stigma of how people portray a survivor. And the tendency to judge, the tendency to assume that this person is or does, certain things as a result. And so, I think reducing that stigma is probably the next thing that has to be emphasized a lot. Because again, a lot of we're so focused on judging the survivors, and instead of judging the perpetrators.
Yeah, the people that change children's lives forever.
Yeah.
And learning everything we can to reduce the risk and to react responsibly and to recognize the signs and to learn the facts. That's all part of the SCARS training. So, as we close, I can't honestly thank you enough, Dr. Hancock, for all of your amazing wisdom when it comes to this and helping our survivors and, helping those out there that are carrying the secret and carrying the shame that was not theirs. Our work at SCARS, we can't stop it because the day that we become silent around child sexual abuse will be detrimental to our survivors.
Absolutely.
And to children and to our families, right? I wrote a quote by Dietrich, I'm probably saying his name wrong, but Bonhoeffer. It says, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." And so we have to love justice for children more than the fear of human judgment, self-preservation, because we know that shame keeps victims silent, and this is not their shame. And we know that silence protects predators. And we know that stigma can prevent survivors from seeking help. It can judge a person instead of understanding a person. And when it comes to this, when it comes to reducing the stigma, and this is our hope, 15 years we haven't been able to do it, but our hope is, that we are going to reduce the stigma, and we each have a role to play in doing that. SCAR's role was to continue this conversation, continue educating our Bermuda community, providing awareness around this topic, reminding people how important children are and how their life matters. And, I can tell you as a survivor and a mom of my two girls, my role is to continue dismantling the walls of shame for myself as a survivor and for them, because it was never our shame. We did nothing wrong. We were children. And we have learned over the years in doing this work that silence has allowed shame to grow.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, silence has, what I think people have to really understand, and hopefully this hits, silence is a huge contributor to a child's harm, as much as the act itself.
Yes. Yes. And this shift, everyone, it can change lives. This shift of this stigma around child sexual abuse, it can change lives. It can protect children. And it can allows the healing to continue because we survivors deserve that.
Yeah.
So to all, as we close this up, to all my fellow survivors, as a survivor, you are beautiful and you are worthy and you have a purpose. And don't be ashamed of your scars. Make no apologies because you were a child.
Yeah. With the right relational and, conditions, the brain can build new pathways. So it's not why didn't you speak sooner? It's what did you need? What do you need to feel safe enough to speak now?
Yes. Say it again. Yep.
The big question at this point is it's not why didn't you speak sooner? It's what do you need to feel safe enough to speak now?
Love that. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hancock, for bringing really clarity to this topic and providing our listening audience with some valuable guidance for those seeking understanding, healing, hope, resolve. We thank you. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, Shelley.
You are welcome, guys. You are always welcome.
Thank you, Bermuda. Thank you, Bermuda Broadcasting. Thank you, Conduit. I want to say our next Survivor Hour, everyone, is scheduled for Thursday, August 27th at 1:15. And please stay on if you can, because we chose this song for our survivors today. Thanks, everyone.